All right, well, let's begin. It looks like it's time. First, I welcome everybody to the first CCP meeting of this year. With that, we'll get started. Madam Clerk, would you please take a roll call?
Yes, I will. And Happy New Year to you, Chief. Member Rosia Vega. Okay, she's muted, but she is present. Member Jim Provenza. No. Member Jonathan Raven.
Present.
Member Tracy Olson.
Present.
Member Dale Johnson.
Present.
Member John Miller.
Present.
Member Karen Larson.
Present.
Member Ian Evans. Member Chief Fruchnick.
Present.
Member Garth Lewis. Member Mark Nigel.
Present.
Member Laura Valdez.
Present.
Okay, roll call is complete. Thank you.
Thank you. Today's meeting of the CCP is being held electronically pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order number N-29-20 issued on March 17th, 2020. The order allows governing bodies of local agencies to hold their meetings electronically, provided that members of the public can also observe and provide public comment electronically. A few guidelines for our meeting to run smoothly. Other than the CCP members, all lines will be muted and unmuted by the moderator. When members speak, please state your full name so that the public can know who is speaking. And if you wish to speak, just please briefly notify me and I'll recognize you and you'll have the floor. With that being said, first agenda item is consideration of approval of the agenda. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to look at it. If you have, can we please get a motion to approve?
This is Tracy. I'd make a motion to approve.
I'll second. Dale.
Okay, roll call vote of the CCP, please.
Member Rosia Vega.
Present.
That was, how do you vote?
If you're approving
abstain.
the agenda.
Abstain, okay. Member Jim Provenza. Looks like he's here now. I see his name. We'll come back to him. Member Jonathan Raven.
Yes.
Member Tracy Olson.
Yes.
Member Dale Johnson.
Yes.
Member John Miller.
Yes.
Member Karen Larson.
Yes.
Member Ian Evans.
Yes.
Absent. Member Chief Fruchnick.
Yes, looks like a member Ian is joining us now.
Okay.
Apologies for being late. My vote, yes.
Okay, thank you, thank you, Ian. Member Garth Lewis. Member Mark Nigel.
Yes.
And member Laura Valdez.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Moves us to agenda item number 3. It's an action item. Consider approval of meeting minutes from August 10th, September 3rd, and October 12th of 2020. The minutes are a little bit changed up from what's traditionally been done. It's to get in line more with what the board does and to just capture the action items and the votes primarily. What the plan is since we're currently on Zoom and we should be for the foreseeable future, and then once Zoom ends, we'll figure out how to do this. We'll be able to attach the actual full meeting to the minutes and then post them online and have that as a historical record as well. So that way you have the quick version of them, and then if we need to, or whoever wants to, can listen to the entire meeting for more of a play-by-play. So that was the thought process behind that. We can approve these collectively or individually if edits are needed, or with that, I'll open it up to discussion.
Might as well approve them collectively. So I make a motion to approve the August 10th, 2020, September 3rd, 2020, and October 12th, 2020 minutes.
Okay. Do we have a second?
This is Dale. I will second.
Okay. With that, can we do a roll call vote, please?
Member Rocio Vega,
Abstain.
Member Jim Provenza. You're muted, Supervisor Provenza.
Abstain.
Thank you. Member Jonathan Raven,
Yes.
Member Tracy Olson,
I wasn't present for the first meeting, so abstain.
Member Dale Johnson,
Yes.
Member John Miller,
Yes.
Member Karen Larson,
Yes.
Member Ian Evans,
Yes.
Member Chief Fruchnick,
Yes.
Member Garth Lewis. Yeah, I see his name there.
Abstain.
Abstain. Thank you. Member Mark Nigel
Abstain.
and Member Laura Valdez.
Yes.
So motion passes 7 yeses and 4 abstains.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item number 4, public comment. Opportunity for members of the public to address the CCP on subjects related to CCP business and not otherwise on the agenda. Do we have any public comment? Oh, Julie, you were muted.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I don't have any hands raised for public comment at this time.
Thank you. Number 5, member announcements. Does any member have any announcements they would like to share with the group? Just scanning everybody. I don't see anyone looking like they're ready, so we'll move on to number 6. This is an action item. Consider revised YOLO CCP bylaws, and with this, I'll turn it over to Phil.
Thank you, Dan. Phil Pogledich, County Council. So most of you, I think, will recall this item from last time. We had a fairly robust discussion of potential bylaws at the last meeting. There were some changes discussed at the meeting that are reflected in the attachment that's before you now. I think it's attachment D to the packet. Yeah, attachment D. And the changes from what was presented last time are shown in red line format. Some of these changes were discussed last time at length. I think the only exception, and folks can correct me if I'm wrong, is on page 4 of the bylaws, where I added some discussion of action items. You'll recall that part of the purpose of these bylaws is to better clarify the roles of the CCP and the CCP Executive Committee, which, as the new language in section E says, are similar but different. They're similar in that they have overlapping authority on a number of criminal justice issues and statute, but they're different primarily in that the Executive Committee has a slightly smaller membership, and it has specific authority in state law to approve a plan for the expenditure of the 2011 Public Safety Realignment Funding and recommend that to the Board of Supervisors, and it's deemed accepted by the board unless the board remands it on a supermajority vote. So what I've attempted to do in section E is say that with the exception of changes affecting the content of the plan for expenditure of 2011 public safety realignment funds, or any specific budget or other recommendations provided to the board regarding implementation of the plan, all matters that come before the CCP are for consideration of the full group. You know, I tried to do this in a way that allows as broad a participation as possible on most of the matters that come before you, accepting only those matters that, in my reading of the statute, should be confined just to the Executive Committee for action. Although again, even on those, the full group can provide input. And I think with that, I'll conclude my comments and be happy to answer any questions.
With that, oh, go ahead. I was going to say, I open it up to the CCP for discussion.
Yeah, I'd like to actually ask a couple questions or bring a couple concerns. Just two of them. First of all, on page 2, so it's under Article 3 membership. There you go. So my one concern on that is if the Board of Supervisors directs by ordinance or otherwise. So my concern is that language or otherwise. Kind of seems very vague, very open.
Yeah, I mean, I don't recall what I might have had in mind in drafting that, except possibly that the board would provide direction like this by resolution. Although that language is broad enough to allow it to happen even by minute order, so relatively informally. I wouldn't have any hesitation with the group striking or otherwise, and otherwise retaining this language. By and large, I think this language reflects what the board's authority is with regard to the role of the seats allocated currently to Karen and Ian as well. To the extent that they might like to break those out in a manner that's more in line with the way they're defined in statute, irrespective of the fact we have a consolidated health and human services agency in the county. So in short, yeah, if or otherwise is troubling, I wouldn't have any issue with the group deleting that.
I would recommend, I'm more comfortable with it by being done by ordinance, I guess by resolution, but some sort of formal process.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, I had in mind if the board was to take action on this, it would be by an ordinance that formally provides what the text mentions here in the county code section relating to the CCP. So it's certainly fine with me.
I just want to make a comment. This is Jonathan Graven on what you said, Phil, in terms of the legislative intent. I don't think the legislative intent was for one voting or for one department head to have more than one vote. So because I think in the majority of counties, all these departments would be broken down into separate departments. So for instance, under the full committee, the DA has 2 votes, which it really shouldn't have. It should have 1 vote. It doesn't have 2 votes, but there's, Laura works for me. So one could conclude that there's 2 votes under the DA's office and then 4 under Health and Human Services. So I just want to clarify that I think when the statute was written, it had in mind counties where each of these were separate departments, basically.
Yeah, and I can't discern any clear intent one way or the other from the statute. And so I don't know what the lesser of 2 evils is, to take what's effectively amounts to 4 seats with 4 separate votes and treat them as a single seat with a single vote, as we've long done here, or to instead recognize that with our consolidated agency, the most appropriate thing to do is seat 4 different people, provide them 4 different votes or something along those lines, and proceed that way as being most consistent with the intent of the legislature. I feel like the latter approach is probably more consistent, but I mean, Jonathan, you and I are forced to read tea leaves here, and there's really not much provided in statute to allow an intelligent conclusion one way or the other. I think this is certainly a defensible approach, the red line language here.
Well, I think your approach is a good approach, the way you wrote it. I was just commenting on the comment you made. I think it's a good approach that if the board chooses to have them be separate entities and each have a vote, then the board can do that by ordinance or resolution. That makes sense.
Understood. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, John Miller chiming in here. I'd also support Jonathan's position. I'm concerned about that. That did occur to me as well, given our current makeup, that it could obviously, what do they call it when they, like what they're talking about the Supreme Court, you put a lot of votes on there to swing the vote. So that is certainly concerning.
This is Tracy. If the board acted by ordinance to allow each of those to be separated, those votes would only affect, it would affect everything except for the executive plan, correct?
Correct. The
So-
strategic plan, you mean?
Correct. There's a strategic, so the strategic plan and the associated budget would still only have 7 votes. There wouldn't be
Correct.
double voting on any of that. Okay. So it's just
Yeah,
allowing,
and only 1 vote from Health and Human Services Agency, Karen, I believe, on the strategic plan.
right. So if the board acted, we'd just be getting votes on everything other than strategic plan and budget.
That's right.
Okay.
Others?
John Mueller, I did have one other issue or one other question, I guess. But definitely willing to yield it if someone else has something else.
I had a question. Looks like section E under Article 5. Well, it's somewhat confusing. I think I understand it. It's that the full committee can vote in an advisory fashion on the strategic plan and the budget related to it. But it's the votes of the executive committee that count. Is that a reasonable interpretation?
Yeah, it is a reasonable interpretation. So what you're saying, I suppose, could play out that the full CP wants to make a recommendation to the CCP executive committee on a matter within the scope of the plan. It's a little odd because there's so much overlapping membership. But as procedurally and otherwise, it might be strange to have that outcome. There's no reason it couldn't happen that way with them making a recommendation and then the executive committee taking the final action on an issue, whatever the issue is regarding the content of the plan.
So I think that would need to be made more clear if we're going to go in that direction. If there's a way to say that specifically.
So am I understanding correctly that your concern relates to a scenario where the full CCP wants to make a recommendation regarding the content of the plan or a matter relating to its implementation to the executive committee for consideration?
Well, or to the board, I suppose. I mean, my understanding is we're saying that the full CCP can vote on anything, but where it relates to the plan or the budget related to the plan, that can only be overturned by 4/5 of the vote of the board, that's solely a vote of the executive committee. So you theoretically could have 2 different votes and 2 different recommendations. Well, actually, it's not a recommendation from the executive committee. It's a fait accompli unless 4/5 of the board disagree.
Correct.
So I just think that would need to be separated out so that it's understandable.
So there's no reason we couldn't do that. What I'm grappling with is whether that's likely to happen in the first place, in part because the membership is so similar between the 2 bodies. It would be, I guess it's not, impossible that the CCP would make a recommendation to the executive committee. You're saying that maybe the CCP would make a recommendation to the board instead of to the executive committee?
Sure. It seems the way this is written, it sounds like they could. And I don't know if we want that. I'm just saying that the way it's written, you could have the executive committee take one position and the full CCP take another. And if that's what we want it to say, we need to state it in a fashion that's more clear. Otherwise, you'll have to come every time it comes up and explain it.
I think the way it's drafted, and it might be that the sentence before the bullets isn't quite as clear as it could be. What it says, I believe, is that matters reflecting the content or regarding the content of the plan or budget or other recommendations provided to the board, those are matters within the purview of the executive committee. That language right before the bullets sets
I see that
up as an exception to the role of the broader membership.
Okay.
And so I don't think that sets the stage for the CCP itself to be making a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors on either of those matters, which would be somewhat, I think, inconsistent with the statute, although maybe not legally improper. But the statute envisions the CCP acting on the plan in particular.
Well, it's the executive committee that acts on the plan, right? Executive committee of the CCP.
Yeah, well, that's correct. I just say CCP. Yeah, the executive committee acts on the plan.
Okay, so there's no intent then to permit the full CCP to be able to make a different recommendation to the board.
That's not the intent of this language.
Okay,
I think that type of recommendation would arguably be inconsistent with the statute, but I have a hard time, the statute basically sets a CCP up as advisory to the probation chief. There's nothing to say that it couldn't make a recommendation to the board, but to make a recommendation to the board in conflict with the position of the executive committee on the plan would be a very odd outcome that I hope this language doesn't facilitate in some way. I don't think it does.
okay.
But yeah, I'd want to avoid that outcome, I think.
Okay, I get it.
Got it? Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think I see where the confusion is coming from, but in reading it a couple times, I don't know that any changes are needed.
Okay, that's fine.
Hey, Phil, it's Jonathan Raven. So I understand what you mean by specific budget item. There could be today or later a vote on how the budget's allocated from our committee. Is that a specific budget item or not? So who would be voting on that?
You could remove, the word specific was, I don't think there's any real meaning to the word specific. Not that I can recall in drafting this, and certainly none that I'm seeing now. That was not intended to be a word of limitation in any way. So again, if that's something we want to delete for the sake of clarity to ensure it's not applied as a limit down the road, that makes sense to me.
Phil, this is Pat. I assume that bullet is separate, meant to be separate from the previous bullet in terms of the CCP plan and the 4/5 requirements around that, so that it doesn't conflict with the County Budget Act.
Correct. You had to go there, huh?
Want to be clear.
Well, there's a dispute about that point that hasn't been resolved.
And this does not purport to resolve it.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Chief Miller, did you have additional?
Yeah, on page 4 of 4, under Article 5E. That last line, if a majority of executive committee members present at a meeting agree that it is unclear whether an action item is within their exclusive purview, the item shall be voted upon by the full membership of the CCP. A little concerned about that, and there's at least 3 lawyers that are on the call, but I'm kind of concerned about I'm concerned a democratic process would, in lieu of a legal process, I would want some sort of like legal review of what the intent of the, or what the letter and the intent of the law says, if it is our purview or not, rather than strictly a democratic process without some sort of, like I said, interpretation or advisement from legal counsel.
Well, I think if an issue like this comes up, I'll be happy to provide an opinion, or whoever's sitting in my seat at the time, although for the foreseeable future, I think it's going to be me advising the CCP. And I expect that would be taken into consideration in determining whether the issue can be resolved short of a vote. I did want to provide some sort of a mechanism, though, for saying, hey, look, we've considered this issue inside and out. We're really not sure if this is one that we should provide an opportunity for the full CCP to weigh in on. And I felt in that type of situation, the issue ought to just go to the full CCP. But yeah, I mean, rest assured, as part of that deliberation, to the extent that it's a legal issue, and it likely would be, at least in part, I would provide an opinion as to my perspective on the correct outcome. It's just that it may not be black and white. That's part of the scenario I'm anticipating with this language. If this language is troublesome to people, we can delete that final sentence. Again, I want to provide some sort of safety mechanism in the event that we've got one of these issues. It feels like maybe it's just an executive committee issue, but There's some uncertainty around that. I want to provide a place for us to land on that in the bylaws, but those issues should be rare. And there's nothing to say we couldn't address it in the manner it's contemplated here or differently, just depending on what feels right in the moment if it happens.
Phil, this is Jonathan Raven. I think the way you've stated it makes sense in the bylaws in your draft.
Phil, I'm sorry. I think the above paragraph, the reason it was confusing is if you just look at it, it looks like it's saying that the full membership of the CCP is voting on those items. If you just change the order of the last sentence before the two bullets and said, the full membership of the CCP shall have authority to vote on items presented for action, with the exception of the following plan-related matters that are within the exclusive purview of the executive committee. If you just reverse the order of that particular sentence, it would be more clear.
Yeah, I agree, and I like that better too. And that's what I was referring to when I said I could see why there was some potential for confusion. It's the way that sentence ends, and you're right. Just flipping those two phrases works, I think, better.
Yeah, I think that works fine. Then even I could understand it.
Do we want to, this is Tracy, to address John's point. Do you want to just flip it and just say if we don't know, then the executive committee gets to vote versus if we don't know, everyone gets to vote? Because I agree. I mean, as lawyers, we all know that it's always better to at least lay out the rules ahead of time than not have the rule and later spend all our time fighting about it.
Yeah, I'd want to err on the side of providing more participation rather than less, but I don't feel strongly about the outcome on that issue.
Yeah, it doesn't matter to me so much. I just didn't know if that solved John's problem with it.
This is Karen. The way I read that one, it was more about if it were something within the purview of our expanded membership, we would want to make sure they had a vote on it. Like if it was something that was specific to education, we would want to make sure that Garth had a vote on it. Or if it was something more specific to employment and social services, maybe we want to have Nolan or Carlene weighing it. You know, like I in my mind, it was talking about those individuals who are members of the larger CCP weighing in on items that were within their purview.
I think that's one example of the type of issue that could arise where this language might be helpful.
All right, Julie, I'd like to open it up to public comment if we have any.
I don't see any hands raised at this time, Chair.
Okay. Any other comments or questions or input from the CCP? Doesn't look like it. I'm not sure where we go at the moment, and Phil, maybe you can help me with this. If there's a motion to carry it forward, we'll go that route today. If not, maybe we need to reword it just a little bit with some of the adjustments.
So I think I heard two changes where I shouldn't say there was consensus, but two changes that at least I think make sense to me. The first is on page 2, and it's in the language that John pointed out earlier. The parenthetical that says by ordinance or otherwise, we would strike or otherwise so that the parenthetical just says by ordinance. Yeah, I'm thinking about wordsmithing that a bit more, but I'll leave it alone for now. And then on section E in page 4, as Supervisor Provenza suggested, the sentence immediately before the two bullets there, we would reverse the order of a couple of phrases. So it would say, accordingly, the full membership of the CCP shall have authority to vote on items presented for action, with the exception of the following plan-related matters that are within the exclusive purview of the executive committee.
With those amendments, I would make a motion to pass these bylaws.
So before you said that, Tracy, I was just going to mention, Phil, you had mentioned striking the word specific.
Oh, that's correct. I don't see any reason to maintain that word. So that would be the third change.
So I'd modify my motion to include that third change.
I'll second.
Got a first by Tracy and a second by Karen. With that, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Member Jim Provenza,
Aye.
member Jonathan Raven,
Yes.
member Tracy Olson,
Yes.
member Dale Johnson,
Yes.
member John Miller,
Yes.
member Karen Larson,
Yes.
member Ian Evans,
Yes.
member Chief Fruchnick,
Yes.
member Garth Lewis,
Yes.
member Mark Nigel,
Yes.
member Laura Valdez,
Yes.
member Rosia Vega.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Next up is agenda item number 7, receive report out from CCP Budget Ad Hoc, and this will be Eric.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Eric Will, CCP analyst. So today I'll just be providing this group with a quick update regarding the Budget Ad Hoc Subcommittee that has been convening over the last several months. So just as a quick reminder, this group was formed at the October 12th CCP meeting, and it consists of members Karen, Tracy, John, Mark, and Laura. And the primary purpose of this subcommittee is to develop budget strategies that align with both the CCP strategic plan and would subsequently be brought forth to the Board of Supervisors as was discussed in the previous item. So as I mentioned, the ad hoc has convened several times over the past few months since October to discuss the existing budget processes and changes that would move the CCP away from its structural deficit and focus on achieving alignment with the CCP goals, utilizing data and metrics to confirm the level of program success. And so today I will just be going over a couple of high level concepts that have been discussed within the subcommittee. I'll ask that any of the subcommittee members add to anything if they feel I've missed anything. And I'll also note that on the agenda today, we have a proposed meeting in March on the 15th of this year to actually delve more specifically into these budget issues that we'll be discussing a little bit today. And so that meeting would be dedicated just to the budget in March and would be a regular agendized meeting of the CCP to make sure that we have enough time to discuss this. So today is not meant to be a blown out discussion of the CCP budget, but rather just to be the beginning point, the starting point for this discussion as we move forward. And if anyone has any questions along the way or comments, please let me know. So in terms of what the Budget Ad Hoc Subcommittee has been discussing, the group agreed that it's crucial that all programs funded by the CCP should be tied to our CCP goals, and that funding, the tie to that funding should be clear. The data also should back up the programs that demonstrate the program goals are being met. So part of achieving this overall goal is continued collaboration with data sharing amongst our members. And so I know we've been doing a lot of increasing in our data sharing over the last year or so, and I think it's really helpful to everyone. And I think the group noted that this is really important for us moving forward. The group also contemplated asking the programs that receive CCP funding to send in their outcome metrics that they're currently using to measure success, as well as data related to those outcome metrics, so that we can really see how people are measuring their programs, how they're doing currently as we move forward with this budget process. Furthermore, the group discussed that programs receiving money should be responsible for continued justification of that funding year over year. So if you receive funding for a program, being able to back it up and say, we received it because of X, we've been able to prove that this program is doing Y, and so we should be able to move forward with funds in Z. The group also discussed what specific steps need to be taken to evaluate the existing budget before moving forward. And so as I mentioned, there's a large focus on outcomes, metrics, looking at data to really support our programs, looking at evidence-based practices, et cetera. And so primarily, this is just looking at some of the steps that we think out of this subcommittee need to be identified before we move forward. So first, looking at what funded programs are properly tied to CCP goals. So we recognize that there are a lot of really good programs that the CCP is currently funding. And so we want to make sure that as we move forward, that we're recognizing the ones that are properly tied to CCP goals already. And so within those goals that are properly tied to the CCP, within those, programs that are properly tied to the CCP goals, we want to see which CCP funded programs are working. So which ones are meeting their stated goals or outcomes, and seeing the level as to which they are meeting those goals. And then also to look at which funded programs are maybe not working as well as we intended them to do. If there's changes that we can make to the programs where we can identify the metrics or outcomes that we need to make alterations to, or if the program is just simply not one that should be funded by the CCP. Furthermore, the group discussed making room for new programs in the CCP that could be funded by this group. So for example, today, in a little bit, we'll be discussing the RFP process for community support. So that is a new function or new program that the CCP would be funding this year that is actively supporting both the CCP strategic plan as well as the Board of Supervisors strategic plan, looking at reduction in recidivism as well as prevention within the criminal justice system. Just a couple more. Furthermore, the group determined that any approach will likely take several years to implement, especially as many budget reductions could require transitioning of staff or change in programs. As such, the movement of the percentages or the delta in the CCP budget would likely take several years to fully implement as we begin to look toward fiscal year 21-22. And within this specific changes to the budget, the group discussed the concept of adjusting the budget proportionally when cuts or increases are experienced. So for example, if you have 20% of the CCP's budget, let's say the budget was $1 million, so you'd have $200,000, but the budget overall shifts down from 1 million to 900,000, you would proportionally decrease that to 20% of 900,000 or 180,000, if that math all makes sense. Basically shifting everything proportionally rather than trying to willy-nilly figure out what numbers make sense and what numbers don't make sense. And so just as a kind of a quick wrap up and next steps, and I'll let anyone step in with any additional information, is we anticipate that I would be reaching out to the individual departments regarding the data, outcomes, and metrics associated with existing programs to determine next steps. So what are we doing right now and how are we measuring it? We want to make sure that we can go through that process so that when we go to look at the budget and any changes that we would make, we actually have everything in front of us ahead of time rather than trying to catch up to it later on. And so with that, I will bring it open for any comments or questions, or if there's any members of the ad hoc subcommittee that would like to add anything at this time. I'm also happy to provide this in a written note for everyone, since I know that was a lot of information as well.
Do we want to talk about, this is Tracy, do we want to talk about timelines of when you think that you'd want to ask for the data and receive the data? So that we can be prepared by our March meeting if we agree to a March meeting?
Absolutely. So I'd say if we're moving forward with this process, that anyone is free to send their data as soon as possible to me. So starting even today, if you have it just ready to go and packaged. But ideally, if we have our meeting on March 15th, we would ideally have a couple of weeks to crunch the data and to go back and forth. So really, if we could get the data within the first week or two of February, I think that would be ideal timing so that we can have further discussions about it. But if there are any roadblocks or anything, we can discuss that individually.
Others? Doesn't appear to be. Was that somebody? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to take Eric up on his offer to send it out in written form, because it was a lot of information and not, it's helpful to see it visually and laid out with the different steps and what the proposal is. So that would be helpful to receive following this meeting.
Sure, and I can attach some deadlines to that as well, just to make sure it's clear for everyone what we're looking to do with this item.
The data may be somewhat of a hurdle, like it always is, but I think we can hopefully collectively get what we need for sure. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone else, which will bring us to 7A, which is an action item. And that is to modify the 2021 CCP meeting schedule to add a meeting at 2 p.m. on March 15th, 2021 to discuss specifically the CCP budget. I'll open it up to the CCP first, and we'll do a quick public comment. Does anybody have any concerns about that date and time and putting that on the agenda specific to the budget? Not seeing any. Julie, do we have any public comment on it?
We do not.
All right. Well, I guess I need a motion.
John Miller, I'll make that motion.
Okay, can I get a second? Looks like.
I thought Karen was going to say something. I don't know if it's been seconded. If not, I'll second.
Okay, I think we have a first by Chief Miller and then a second by Tracy. With that, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Member Jim Provenza,
Sorry. Aye.
thank you. Member Jonathan Raven,
Yes.
member Tracy Olson,
Yes.
member Dale Johnson,
Yes.
member John Miller,
Yes.
member Karen Larson,
Yes.
member Ian Evans,
Yes.
member Chief Fruitneck,
Yes.
member Garth Lewis,
Yes.
member Mark Nigel,
Yes.
member Laura Valdez,
Yes.
and member Rosia Vega.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Brings us to number 8, receive AB 109 10-year report update. And this is Eric as well.
Okay, so hi everyone, once again, Eric Wills, CCP analyst. So just a really quick update on this item that we discussed previously. Just a 10-year report as AB 109 is coming into its first decade in existence. The CCP wanted to recognize the efforts that have been undertaken within YOLO locally and to make sure that we really can track the progress that this group has made over the last decade. And so you'll find within the agenda today just an initial outline really for the proposed 10-year report that includes a general YOLO CCP timeline, some of the major accomplishments, but certainly not all, and highlights from the annual BSCC reports that are filed each year for YOLO County. And so I'm not going to go through that document today, but if there is any feedback about what the CCP members would like to have included within that report, would love any input you have today, or feel free to send me an email in the future. Also today, we're seeking, I just wanted to let everyone know that I will be seeking information and metrics, outcomes, accomplishments from the individual departments. So look forward to an email from me for more information on this. But just wanted to check in with the group today with for any input, as well as just to let you know that staff is beginning to draft this effort. And so we hope to have this completed over the next several months. I anticipate that we'd be discussing this again in April 2021. And with that, I'll close out my quick update and offer my time for any comments or questions.
This is Tracy. I had a question. I had thought that over time, we had kind of as a group decided that perhaps CCP had spread our wings far too wide, and we really had a strict mandate with specific statutory mission that we'd refined, through our work group. And so things like Prop 47 grant, I didn't think that was really a CCP initiative. And it certainly was not an AB 109 initiative. The grant writing group, I did not think that was a CCP initiative. Mental health court was not a CCP initiative. They're all, I think it's confusing because it's all the same players that are running these efforts forward, but they're not CCP in my mind. So I wanted to lay that out there and see what others thought about that. I thought we had very affirmatively and intentionally closed up our mission and our goals just to be aligned with what CCP statute says.
Well, this is Jonathan. When you say an initiative, what do you mean that Prop 47 is not a CCP initiative? I mean, has someone labeled it that? Because certainly it's in line with the mission of CCP. And so I'm not sure what you're saying about.
So AB 109 was 2011, right? Prop 47 was totally separate voter initiative in 2014. There were savings from Prop 47 by just how it rolled out that was put aside for grants. The county applied for a grant, and then the county implemented the Prop 47 grant, which primarily affected misdemeanors. So it's not really the AB 109 population. It wasn't an AB 109 realignment program. It's more criminal justice reform. So I think that what we've been doing is confusing criminal justice reform, all of it, and saying it's a CCP initiative.
But I thought that's what we chose to do. I mean, that was my impression, that we chose to move more, expand. I don't want to say move away from AB 109, but expand to progressiveness, innovation, reform, as under the umbrella of CCP, and expanding AB 109. That's what it seems like we've been doing.
We think we had from the beginning, and then we realized that we were handcuffing ourselves by calling everything a CCP initiative and putting everything on the CCP agenda. We realized that we didn't have to, and it probably wasn't a great idea, and we weren't being as productive by doing it that way. So we had intentionally backed away from that. If other people disagree, totally fine, but that's how I thought we were approaching. CCP is a tool in criminal justice reform, but CCP isn't all, everything doesn't fall under CCP.
So what I'm hearing you're saying, Tracy, between the lines, is that a lot of our funding goes to those areas, and they are completely consistent with the CCP goals and mission. Restorative justice, holding offenders accountable, restoring victims, building competency and supporting community reintegration. So I want to just ask you, are you like saying, when you're making that statement, that our staff that does all those things that are consistent, completely consistent with the CCP goals, should not be funded by CCP dollars? Is that what you're really saying?
What I'm really saying is, for instance, Prop 47, when we got that grant, it had nothing to do with CCP initiative. It's the population was not AB 109 realigned population. So same with the grant writing group, we had decided as a group that we needed to really make sure that when we got grants that we had sustainability, and we had every single person, department that it was going to be affected weigh in on it, so we could understand what those effects would be, et cetera. But that's not necessarily a CCP thing. And in fact, I think we even stopped putting that on the CCP agenda necessarily. So what I'm saying is realignment, we have a finite amount of money for realignment to address a finite population. And I think that we should recognize that when we're talking about what CCP has done in the last 10 years and not put everything under the CCP agenda.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't think everything is under the CCP agenda, but yeah, I mean, that's fine.
I think just to the question Jonathan just asked, I do think there may be opportunities for those employees doing work in line with our strategic plan where there's a gap in funding. Say maybe some portion of their funding is by a grant, but we need some portion of funding to make them whole. That would be something we would consider at the CCP. So that's, I think, where there's overlap, because there is so much, there are so many initiatives that are in line with the CCP strategic plan and with the county strategic plan. And there are times where there is funding from different pots going to one position. So there are times where it might be appropriate, but I agree that in general, we don't need to be talking about those other initiatives as a part of the regular CCP agenda.
Yeah, this is Jonathan, and I completely agree with that. So for instance, mental health court, you know, all the grant funding, all of it goes to, the vast majority goes to Health and Human Services, and some of it goes to probation. So that's the gap, you know, funding other staff that are not funded by grants. But so I completely agree with you, Karen. And then if that's what you're saying, Tracy, I agree with you too.
So then I guess to come back to Eric, what's the direction then for him to put in the 10-year plan? Is Prop 47 go in the CCP plan? I would think it doesn't. Or at least it should have to, maybe there'd be a section that would say, these are the things that the county's accomplished in the last 10 years, but not necessarily CCP.
Yeah, I agree with you. Because when you said CCP initiative, it was as if CCP, you know, was taking credit for some of those programs. And I mean, I think it's important to report on those because they are in line with the mission and the goals. But for instance, you know, the CCP doesn't fund any of the positions for Prop 47. You know, we have a grant that's likely going to go away. But so I think it should be in the 10-year plan, but it's not CCP's program or initiative. So I agree with you.
So does Eric have a separate section that just talks about, I guess those are details you guys we can figure out later. We don't have to do it here.
Yeah, I'm thinking when I think of the last 10 years and the various strategic plans that the CCP's had, and also the county and all the good work that's been going into that over the past decade, I think our intent was to capture the work that's gone on, and maybe not just specific to the CCP, but maybe the county in general. Some of my thoughts on it. Just kind of a historical document that has shown what has occurred.
So
Eric,
maybe,
oh, sorry.
I mean, it's called the 10-year public safety realignment draft outline. So maybe it's just, you know, the CCP 10-year plan, but it's also CCP and criminal justice 10-year plan. That could be, if you want to make it all encompassing.
I wonder if there could be two separate sections where one is like CCP funded initiatives in the plan and one is like CCP supported or like adjunct projects, because I think there has been a lot of work by all the partners, you know, and the departments in the CCP to support those projects, and they help align with some of the initiatives of the CCP, even if they weren't funded by it. And maybe that's too far forward for this report, but it sounds like it's kind of where the direction we want to move in the future, with aligning funding with the initiatives and the strategic plan. And that way, you know, moving forward, the CCP 10-year plan or whatever it's officially called, you know, would more easily align with that moving forward. I don't know if that's a happy medium for this point as we continue to better align moving forward.
Any other thoughts on that, Eric?
Just a suggestion that I would have, Eric, would be that maybe if the funding was attached to it, like if it's a certain initiative and if it was funded by the CCP, maybe then that is noted, you know, if everything's going to be included.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can take all this input and see if there's some changes that we can make, because I think it's something that we can really utilize in our budgeting as we move forward, is looking back into what have we funded and what has been CCP specific. So I think that makes it clear. So I can definitely do some work to clear up, you know, other programs that have CCP members who have participated versus actual funding of CCP dollars.
Because when you say CCP members, I mean, the entire criminal justice and behavioral health conglomerate of Yolo County is on the CCP. So that's, I think, where the confusion always comes about, is because we're all the same people at every single meeting. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so it sounds like we have a little more work to do, and we can bring back an updated proposal or plan for the April meeting, if that works for everybody. Looks like everybody's okay with that. So we'll move on to agenda item number 9, provide input on neighborhood support programs, RFP. Eric, this is you again.
Great, thanks, Dan. Okay, so for this item, as I mentioned previously within the ad hoc discussion, there is a new item as part of the CCP's budget for fiscal year 2021, which is $80,000 for neighborhood support programs. If we could actually bring that up, Julie, if you don't mind, that's attachment F, it'll be at the end. Perfect, thank you. So I will just quickly go through this RFP that staff has put together for this $80,000 in neighborhood supports. And really today what we're seeking is input in this for this process, as well as looking at timing as well for this. And so without further ado, I'll just mention once again, this is attachment F in your packet if you are following along here today. And so today's, this item really, this RFP is about seeking to both reduce recidivism and prevent entry into the criminal justice system, things that are in alignment with both the CCP and board strategic plans. As noted in the RFP near the bottom of this page, some examples of this included with this RFP might be recreational, social, athletic, and/or cultural activities, education programs, parenting programs and supports, prevention, intervention programs, and supports. And so really a broad variety of programs that we're seeking for this RFP process. And so really seeking to work with the community on this to discover ways that we might implement a program within this year that can start to really look at prevention within the criminal justice system, something that has been mentioned at a lot of the previous CCP meetings as well as the board meetings. And so with that, staff really wants to jump in on this with the CCP's input and anticipate moving forward with this after the CCP meeting as quickly as possible to move forward in this process. But it's fairly straightforward. It would just be a standard RFP format. So we would seek proposals from the community for these programs. And then what's anticipated is that rather than waiting for the next CCP meeting in April, that the CCP could actually form another ad hoc subcommittee that would actually go through the proposals that are received so that we can move a little more quickly, as formal approval is not required by the full CCP body. And so at this time, I just want to open this up for any input anyone has after reviewing this RFP, or if anyone has any questions about the RFP, as well as the process moving forward with this RFP.
I'll open it up to the group. Eric, I'll start. My feedback would be to change the timeframes and get it sooner than later if possible, just because it is for this fiscal year and time's ticking.
Okay, absolutely. I think we could jump on this as early as the end of this week for releasing this if there's not major changes or input by the CCP today.
Does the money have to be expended by the end of the fiscal year?
Yes, that is my understanding.
So they'd have to spend it March through June?
Yes. So it'd be very quick.
Is that required, or is that something that we could change? Because that's $80,000. I mean, that could affect the programs we select, right?
Correct. I think there might be, I can find out if there's a way that we could look at funding from this year rolling into next year to see if there's a mechanism for that. I imagine there's some avenue for that as well.
What are the thoughts for, obviously, we're gonna have to get a team, a committee to score it and rank the proposals that come in. Do we want to do that via an ad hoc or other mechanism? I'm not sure which one, but.
I think it's a great proposal and concept. I might have missed this, so I apologize, but is this additional funding that the CCP received that we're rolling out, or was it like reviewed in the budget ad hoc to make a recommendation moving forward? What's the 80,000 coming from? And will it be, I imagine one of the things that folks applying for it would want to know is this one-time funding, or do we anticipate this being available, you know, each fiscal year?
So this was just approved as part of the CCP's budget process, I believe, back with the rest of the budget last year or at the end of last year. And so I don't know if we would necessarily say that this would be ongoing funding at this time. I'd say it's more likely that it would be one time until we know more. I think that's at least that clear from how the CCP is addressing the budget. So I wouldn't want to put any expectations out that this would be ongoing, at least until we have more information about how this process goes.
I think to Tracy's point, and just knowing how long these processes take between releasing an RFP, reviewing the proposals, negotiating a contract, I think it would be best if we allow the contractor to have the term be through until they've, expended all of the funds versus just a hard stop at June 30th.
Okay.
I may have missed this. Why do we have the hard stop? Maybe I missed that, because I mean, even with grants, most of them, if it's a 3-year grant and you have, some savings, they'll let you carry it into the 4th year. So I might have missed that, but why do we have that hard stop?
So I think just in alignment with the fiscal year itself for 2021, but I do know that we can request a rollover. So I don't think that there should be any issue with it. Just to clear that up.
One, it does, looking at the proposal, it does say funds available up to 80,000 annually with the intent to award a 3-year agreement. So if the intention is that this is kind of unknown and will be determined by the CCP funding cycle each year, I think we might want to make that a little more clear, because the way I would read that is I'm applying for a $240,000 grant over 3 years or up to that. So I think we might want to clarify that the intent is hopefully to have this be a multi-year program. Right now, the funds are committed for, this fiscal year with the possibility of rolling over any unspent.
Gotcha. I'll clear that up.
With that, is there a motion to form an ad hoc for the scoring of the RFPs once they come in?
Yes, I'd make a motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Phil, can I ask, since this is turning into an action item, do I need public comment on this?
Yes, you should take public comments on this. And I just want to clarify, the ad hoc will score and then come back to the CCP with recommendations for contracts in March?
I mean, oh, go ahead. Eric?
So we could structure it that way. I think part of the question was who ultimately would need to approve this process, whether that needs to be the full CCP or if the ad hoc could make a decision on behalf of the CCP. So I think that was one of the questions of the process.
Well, I would move as part of the original is that the ad hoc be able to make that decision. If they're gonna score, then they can award. We've already allocated the funds.
And then we certainly can return to the full CCP with updates on the process and for any input as the process moves forward.
Yeah, I concur with Tracy on that as well.
With that, we'll open it up to public comment before a vote. Julie?
There is no public comment, Chair.
Thank you. All right, so Phil, again, sorry. Do we vote to form an ad hoc, and if it goes, then we choose the members of the ad hoc, or do we do that as part of the motion and the vote?
Do it either way. I mean, for example, you could have a motion that proposes formation of an ad hoc with 4 members who shall be blah, blah, blah. It's probably easier to do it. It's probably easier to form the ad hoc in one motion and then take nominations for membership in a separate motion. How many seats are we talking about on this ad hoc? Might be good to clarify.
Probably looking at 3 to 4.
If you want a tiebreaker, you might want an odd number.
Yeah, I was just gonna say you have to have an odd number.
Let's go 5 then.
5. Okay, so we have a motion to form an ad hoc. Let's take care of that first, and then we'll follow up with the members of the ad hoc. So,
Dan, I'm sorry, clarification. So will the ad hoc have the authority to make the decision?
I believe that was the motion, yes.
Okay, just want to make sure.
So with that, Julie, can we do a roll call vote, please?
Member Jim Provenza,
Aye.
Member Jonathan Raven,
Yes.
Member Tracy Olson,
Yes.
Member Dale Johnson,
Yes.
Member John Miller,
Yes.
Member Karen Larson,
Yes.
Member Ian Evans.
Yes.
Oh, Ian, you're muted.
Yes.
Thank you. Member Chief Fruitneck,
Yes.
Member Garth Lewis,
Yes.
Member Mark Nigel,
Yes.
and Member Laura Valdez,
Yes.
and Member Rosia Vega.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. So let's first have a quick discussion. It sounds like we're settling on 5 members of the ad hoc. Do we want to discuss that further? Okay.
I think that was decided as part of the motion.
Oh.
Right? In terms of the 5.
Yes, it was, Phil. So with that, I guess, would anyone like to discuss who they feel should be on it, or want to throw your name in the ring, or how would we like to go about this?
Does this have to be one of us, or can it be someone that we nominate from our department?
So an ad hoc, it really needs to be members of the body that creates it. Otherwise, it becomes subject to the Brown Act. Dan can also just assign 5 people.
I would prefer if we get some buy-in and some volunteers first, Phil.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Dan, I didn't realize your question was prompting the discussion of who should be on it, not how many seats there were. My mistake a moment ago.
No worries. Does anyone have a strong desire to be on it?
I will confirm an executive board can sit on it. That's not a problem, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's no problem.
Okay. I'd volunteer.
I would also like to volunteer.
How long of proposals are we talking about here? It doesn't specify that in the RFP.
I will specify it to be probably no more than 2 to 3 pages at the most. I think it can be very, very short.
I can be on it then. I have another RFP at the same time that's much longer, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't doubling the work there. That's no problem.
I would like to throw my name in if I'd like to sit on it.
Eric, if you're going to be a reviewer too, that's, I mean, I know you're not on the CCP, but if Eric's the 5th, he could function as the tiebreaker. I don't know, Phil, if that goes against our motion.
I mean, it kind of goes against it, right? I mean, the idea is the CCP membership will be doing the scoring, I think.
I'll participate as well. This is Garth.
Garth gets A+.
Yeah.
So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. That would be 5 if it's Garth, Chief Miller, Laura, Ian, and myself. Would anybody like to make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Okay,
Still.
would anybody like to second it?
Second, Jonathan.
Okay, with that, can we do a quick roll call, please?
Okay, we're getting really good at this now. All right, member Jim Provenza,
Aye.
member Jonathan Raven,
Yes.
member Tracy Olson,
Yes.
member Dal Johnson,
Yes.
member John Miller,
Yes.
member Karen Larson,
Yes.
member Ian Evans,
Yes.
member Chief Fruitnick,
Yes.
member Garth Lewis,
Yes.
member Mark Nigel,
Yes.
member Laura Valdez,
Yes.
and member Rosia Vega.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, which brings us to number 10. Can I get a motion to end the meeting?
I'll make that motion.
All right, can I get a second?
Second.
I second it.
All right, thanks everybody, and we will see you in March. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.